Oviedo in Spain and Łódź in Poland. She's going to talk about the research she did for her master's called He Who Pays the Piper Calls the Tune, Masculinity and Sex Purchase Online, a Critical Discourse Analysis. She's got 2 articles coming out in academic journals, one called Tensions Between Feminist Principles and the Demand for Prostitution in the Neoliberal Age, and one called, and I love this title, Men That Buy Inequality, Critical Analysis of Sex-Biased Discourse on Prostituted Women and Girls in a Spanish journal. And to me that phrase says it all. I thought, my God, it's 4 words and it says it all about prostitution and what it does to us. So Rosa's currently doing a PhD at Dublin City University, again focusing on sex bias and the relationship between masculinity and violence in prostitution. And she'll be with us in a moment.
Sorry, this is too complex.
Sorry.
Well, hello. This presentation is based on the research project that I did for the Masters of my the Erasmus Mundus Master's degree in Women and Gender Studies. My aim was to analyze the men's discourse, the sex bias discourse, to expose their opinions and their behavior with prostituted women. This was not the original paper. I kept the He Who Pays the Piper Calls the Tune because I wanted to put an emphasis on the economic power of men over women within the prostitution contract, which is something that we always have to deal with when we deal with prostitution. And what we would say for the Spanish speakers in the room, quien paga manda. So the person who pays rules. And originally the second part of the title was Masculinity and Sex Purchase Online, a Critical Discourse Analysis, but I changed it slightly now to make the point that analyzing the sex buyers' discourse and studying their mindset through their discourse, in this case studying the men basically, can be a very useful tool for radical feminists to expose sex buyers' misogyny. So, debates on prostitution throughout history have been and still are very wide and complex. But for practical reasons, I focused only on feminist debates and excluded religious-based and conservative debates on prostitution. Something that I'm very keen on is that in the 19th century, British feminists of the abolitionist movement were united in holding men accountable for the abuse of women in prostitution. Whereas, as we know, nowadays the feminist movement has been divided between abolitionists who believe prostitution is violence against women and want to or aspire to its eventual extinction by taking legal measures that shall reduce the demand, and regulationists who believe it's a job like any other, but only stigmatized due to the so-called moralist prejudices and want to make it legal. Both anti- and pro-prostitution feminists place a great deal of importance, I think, in the violence that prostituted women suffer, but they differ in the explanations and reasons, and therefore they differ in the solutions that they offer for this problem. I want to highlight that among the proponents of the legalization and decriminalization, the legal models are not only the postmodern left, male leftists and liberal feminists, or rather neoliberal feminists, but also sex buyers, sex traffickers, being brothel owners, etc., who are to have the best position under a position of decriminalization or also legalization. Also, there are huge economic interests that are behind the business of prostitution, and therefore behind those who defend that it's a job like any other. And this includes governments. In 1998, the International Labour Organization recommended for governments to legalize prostitution in order to benefit from the revenues. Right, so as As researcher Julia O'Connell-Davison says, women in prostitution have rights and deserve respect, not because or despite the fact that they are prostitutes, but because they are human beings. So they deserve to have their rights respected and guaranteed. Something that both anti and pro-prostitution feminists would agree upon. But given the circumstances, meaning that, meaning the division between the abolitionist movement, the feminist movement, we should make an effort to subject ourselves to self-criticism, to maybe work together to a certain extent. So, for example, abolitionists can recognize that there might be some women that might want to engage voluntarily in sex work, but then neoliberal feminists have to be aware that their analysis of prostitution can be rightly applied only to a very, very tiny percentage of women, usually white, middle class, from the so-called first world. And so therefore that they ignoring the needs and the rights of the majority of people, women in prostitution, who are women of color, black women, and poor women. So the most vulnerable side of the things. Prostitution has thrived in the times of neoliberal capitalism, but it is not a capitalist phenomenon, but a patriarchal one, as it is rooted in the relationship, the unequal relationship between men and women. It's the same institution that was traditionally defended by defining prostitutes as inferior, like biologically, mentally, etc., it's now defended by asserting the prostitutes' rights. Nowadays, the mainstream discourse on prostitution is based on a cooptation of left-wing and feminist terms, such as the workers' rights and the right of women to decide over their own body, etc., etc. Which puts the focus on the woman as usual, instead of highlighting the fact that in a society like this, which is deeply misogynistic, deeply racist, and deeply classist, the only people who are completely free to choose prostitution are not the women and girls who enter it, but the men who freely choose to demand it and who pay for it to exist. And also, sex buyers' attitudes towards prostitutes need further scholarly attention, because they are likely to hold beliefs that are likely to link the perpetration of violence against women. So the methodological tool of my thesis was a critical discourse analysis, which allowed me to address the issue in a systematic and critical way, because it focused on the importance between discourse and power relations, in this case patriarchal power relations. This website is one of the most popular among sex buyers, at least of this territory. It's English, by the way. Although its domain is in California, which means that it's protected by the United States Constitution and its guaranteed right of free speech. Now, the reviews in Internet are basically guides for sex buyers to decide which woman or girl to choose. So the information that they provide is basically focused on the woman. And objectifying language is overly used, which is in itself a form of symbolic violence. For example, women are often compared and or equated with objects or lifeless matter, such as a blow-up doll, a dead body, etc. And it is common to comment on the quality of their vaginas and reduce the value of the prostitute and her service to that. For example...
Rosa, sorry, just a tiny bit. Okay.
Okay. For example, men compare vaginas that are not considered to be tight or small enough with inanimate objects, such as a bucket or a tunnel. The positive reviews. So through the positive reviews, sex buyers advise each other. This is a patriarchal myth. Obviously. So through the positive reviews, sex buyers advise each other about seeing certain women or girls that provided so-called good service, which is, or what they define by her being accommodating, solicitous, happy and willing to please. All this is literal, that's what I keep doing this. And allow him to do whatever he wants, basically. The aim of the encounter is to satisfy men's expectations, both sexual and non-sexual. What I call non-sexual is ego-related expectations, such as smiling at him when she opens the door and things like that. They expect prostitutes to work and pleasing them in every sense. And those expressions such as made an effort to handle it, never asked you to stop, and she didn't complain are common and highlighted as positive. Right, so through the negative reviews, sex buyers construct what they call a bad service, which is defined by her being mostly keen on the money, having sex in an unenthusiastic and disappassionate manner, showing complete indifference, and not being able to pretend that the man is smart and funny by laughing at his jokes and things like that. Now, as customers who pay for a service, one would think that this man should expect the other party to be mostly keen on money. But despite wrapping the prostitution gender relations with neoliberal and business-like terms that are aimed to justify their own act of paying for sex, these men do not want the woman to have the professional behavior of money-driven businesswoman. This reveals a fundamental inner contradiction in their attitude towards prostitution as a job. Money is the only reason for which an individual would sell services of any kind. No? And girls and women in prostitution would not have sex with sex buyers if they weren't being paid for it. And that's why they have to pay them. And this is key for feminist debates. This is because the fact that a woman or a girl must renounce their own sexual pleasure and freedom for a man to satisfy his, that's what creates immense tension in feminist debates. There were several points in the thesis for analyzing both the positive and the negative reviews, but I don't have time to present all of them, so I'm only going to focus on a few. A couple, actually. I'm going to focus on boundaries and dissociation now. Now, dissociation, there are certain things that sex buyers complain about that have been highlighted in prostitution research for being strategies of women and girls that are involved in the sex trade. A major survival strategy consists on the need of dissociating, which is splitting between the personal self and the prostituted self, making use of tactics that include the setting up of physical and emotional boundaries. Maddie Coy, for example, she defines dissociation from the body as living it emotionally when it is impossible to live physically, and points out this psychological defense strategy is a well-documented reaction to trauma, particularly sexual abuse. The women she interviewed dissociated as a coping mechanism during commercial sex exchanges. They link surviving sexual abuse in childhood with switching off from the body, and later repeated it when they were involved in prostitution. I've selected some extracts of some of the comments of these men that I'm going to, can you see? That I'm going to read aloud. So the first guy says, service was rushed, oral sex was uninspiring and attempted at a rapid, ridiculous rate. A friendly hand job was performed, delivered in the most insincere, mechanical way. A mass amount of love and a flaxen disinterested posture where the girl displayed sheer ambivalence towards me and the act itself. Second guy says, halfway through she was unenthusiastic and disappassionate, in spite of my having taken a shower before and asking if she was if she was feeling and trying to help her enjoy it by trying to be light, funny, engaging, and give her enjoyable reverse oral sex on her. She claimed afterwards that she was just tired, but I suspect rather that she's not cut out for being a working girl, a prostitute, in their slang. And the last guy, the sight of her sour face looking silently at the sailing during the final missionary position was enough to dampen anyone's enthusiasm. So, as you can see, they themselves realize and speak about very clearly about these women who are obviously dissociating. They were not mentally there, they were not emotionally there, they were having a tough time, and they only point that out to make themselves look as some sort of victims of the woman. And the other one, it's male violence against women and suspicion of exploitation. Now, the men, they can use this online tool that all this type of online communities give them. They can use the online tool to publicly punish the woman or the girls that do not comply with their expectations and requirements. Not only their language, it's overly violent, but they do write openly about their violent acts without being afraid of immorally judged by their male peers. Actual violence against women is openly displayed in many instances, where they push their limits even though she has stated clear boundaries, admit being totally careless during intercourse, or show an utter lack of empathy and respect over her suffering. And sometimes sex buyers even quote the woman's words, but signs that they might be in distress or that they might be hurting them or that they're basically suffering are met with total sarcasm and contempt. Besides, signs of possible trafficking are either entirely ignored or disregarded as irrelevant. And this is consistent with previous research on sex buyers, which showed that the suspicion of trafficking and the awareness of prostitution negatively affecting the woman's lives is not going to work as a deterrent for them to stop buying sex. And the next, sex buyers. So the first guy says, after 15 minutes of penetration, she rushed me to come. She aborted the session after 45 minutes. She left the room telling me that she was going to talk to her driver, that was the pimp who he actually met, about something. From the little I could overhear, it appeared that she was crying. What the fuck? I believe that what happened is that her cervix got bruised and she couldn't take any more penetration. You might now think that I have a huge cock. Perhaps I am a bit above average, depending on which survey you're looking at, but definitely I'm not big. Also, she didn't tell me to slow down or anything. If she can take some hard penetration for 20 minutes, then she's not cut out to do this job. So, as you can see, well, this was a long story. Now, this was a very long comment. I only could write a bit for this. But he says also she didn't tell me to slow down or anything, whereas in the first sentence he actually said that she rushed him to come, which is another way of showing discomfort. But he still finds time to speak about his penis, of course, because that's what it's all about. And yeah, you can see how he doesn't care at all about her being in a... even though he has paid the pimp, like straight to the pimp, and also he knows that she is not doing it freely, he still says that she is not cut out to do this job. Now, the final, or the end of this story, these were two Romanian sisters under the power of this pimp, And so when this one starts crying over her cervix being bruised or whatever it was, the pimp basically sends the younger sister for the sex buyer to finish. He still complained about the other sister, like. And the other one, I was after some verbal action, that's sex without condom, and was told that this agency has a few girls that offer this service. So I took a chance to this newly arrived babe from Turkey. I asked to, now his grammar is so bad, it's especially difficult for me to read this aloud. They even have like their own slang to like refer to sex without condom and stuff like that, and they look for it actively, which obviously puts the girl at risk of pregnancy and sexual transmitted diseases. But that's not of their business. Like, they're never going to care about that in any legal model, and obviously not if it's prostitution gets legalized or decriminalized. The sex buyers are going to be the same men. So there's no way to control them, like, by law. Yeah. Yeah. I'm reading the conclusions. Okay. So to conclude, we must remember that there are two core pieces to prostitution. One party wants sex, the other does not. One party has money and the other needs money. By writing public reviews of prostituted women and girls in virtual communities, sex buyers define the ideal terms and conditions under which they want the prostitution contract to take place, hence controlling the context for the production of discourse. Their lexical choices prove that they do not intend to establish a commercial type of relationship based on equality and mutual respect. The reviews indicate traits of toxic, hostile and toxic type of masculinity, which reveals misogynistic attitudes that come close to violence against women. Sex buyers frequently indicate that they regard the objectification and dehumanization of women as inherent in prostitution. So the worker is treated as a product by the customers. Something that, by the way, neoliberal feminists never take into account. The money, it's always going to entail a power imbalance that potentially is going to put women's physical and mental health at risk. So trying to make prostitution look as a matter of moralism is rather frivolous if you take into account what the sex buyers themselves are speaking about here, and all of us feminists, we should be worrying about the women's actual working conditions, because not only it's not easy to identify what the skills necessary for this job would be, but they are likely to be based on completely opposed notions for sex buyers and prostituted women. Rachel Moran, she has reduced to 3 the necessary skill set for prostitution: the ability to control your reflex to vomit, the ability to restrain your urge to cry, and the ability to imagine your current reality is not happening. The business-related terms that prostitution campaigners use to defend that prostitution is just a job like any other. It's only an imperfect way of masking the abuse and the suffering that women and girls must endure within prostitution. Prostitution tells men that they can buy a self-coerced and subservient role of women and potentially enact the traditional gender roles without being effectively challenged. So ultimately, defending the enactment of men's economic power to buy a male fantasy based on non-egalitarian conditions supports and perpetuates violence against women and gender equality at a larger scale. And thus, prostitution damages all women by providing a locus for the enactment of a type of masculinity with overt misogynistic bias where male ego and sexual fulfillment are central, and where money buys for men the right to disregard a woman's sexual pleasure, freedom, health, and well-being.